her newest book, In the Country of Women, among other exciting things, whatever she and Heather want to discuss. Their chat's going to last about 30 minutes. While you are watching, ask us questions. There's chat right here on the side. You can also subscribe to this wonderful publication. We're a quarterly magazine. Get it delivered to your door for just $24 a year. Alta Online is the over there right now. Finally, and most importantly, now more than ever is the time to support our authors and independent booksellers. You can buy In the Country of Women right now. There's a buy the book link, hopefully, right underneath our faces. Click on that. It will take you to bookshop.org. If you buy it from there or your favorite bookseller, it's going to support that independent bookseller or booksellers everywhere. So please do that. Let's take it away, Heather and Susan.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, Susan.
Hi, this is so much fun.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to talk about In the Country of Women. In the Country of Women looks at your girls' ancestors. It looks at the women, the matriarchs in your family and in your ex-husband's family, whose stories maybe might not have been told before this book. And it talks about the odysseys of women, how generally, you know, we think of the stories of men as being the stories that kind of dominate. And so this story really looks at the matriarchs and the women that kept family lines together and kept people going, and looks at the rich legacy that your girls have and that exists in Riverside, California, where you were born and raised and still live and teach today. So I'm just really excited to get into it. Can you talk to us about the inspiration for the story, where this idea came from?
Yeah, it's really funny. I have this picture back here that I always keep near me, and this is my 3 daughters, and it's a different iteration of the cover, but we were all so close when they were little, and I had made their wedding dress, their bridesmaid, flower girl dresses. But today I'm tired a little bit because I stayed up really late writing about my mother-in-law, Alberta Sims. And I can never ever talk about this book without showing this picture, which this is the other picture that just changed my life. And as you can see, this is a signed copy because I need to get this to Bernice, which is my mother-in-law's aunt. My mother-in-law, Alberta Sims, was sort of the inspiration for this, and she died 25 years ago when I was pregnant with my 3rd kid. And that's what I was writing about today. My childhood was crazy and fun, and Riverside could be everything all at once. But until I sat down to write this book, I never realized, like you said, the women's histories were all secrets. And Alberta used to tell me stories about her own mother, Daisy Carter, who had been orphaned. Her mom was run down on the road right in front of Daisy Carter when Daisy Carter was only 5. Then Daisy brought her 4 daughters, including Alberta, to Riverside in 1936. And people often say, "Oh, when did Black people first arrive in California?" You know, people didn't really come until after World War II. But that's not true. Alberta arrived here when she was 3 years old in 1936, and she and some of her friends went to public school. Public schools were integrated in Riverside early on, but one of her friends integrated West Riverside School in Rubidoux, California, just across the river. What I was writing about my mother-in-law last night makes me a little sad, but when I met her, I was 15, and it was Memorial Day, so it was May 1976, the bicentennial year, and my boyfriend was 16 and I was 15, and he brought me up the driveway, and the driveway is this iconic place in Riverside where literally hundreds of people have eaten in my mother-in-law and father-in-law's driveway. And my mother-in-law held open the screen door and held out her hand and said, "Come inside and get you a plate." And I went into her kitchen and she began to talk to me, and I'm a good listener. And she told me that day she was making this huge ham, and she was making all these plates, and she kept putting foil over all these plates. And if you could see my kitchen table right now, there's foil everywhere. Because my mother-in-law said, "You know, you always have to cook for the stranger." And I was 15, Heather, and I remember thinking, what is she talking about? Like, you know, there were 5 kids in my family, and I cooked a 3-course meal for 7 of us. And she said, you never know who's going to come by hungry. And she just kept tenting this foil. And I remember the sound it made. That was the beginning of sort of the way my life changed. And that was kind of the moment that I wanted to start this book with.
You're talking about the yard and the driveway, and that's a really important part of the book. That's that kind of gathering place that people have come together throughout your girls' personal history and your personal history. And I wanted to ask you, I know you also write about your porch, and I've been following you on Instagram, so I've seen all of the wonderful things that have been happening. I know this is a really hard time for a lot of people, and you're in an area that's been really hit hard by the coronavirus. But I was wondering if you could share some of the wonderful things that are happening just in your neighborhood and in those spaces that you reference in the book as well.
That's so nice that you brought it up, because I am never anything but honest. And I know if any of my students are watching, they're laughing because this is exactly the same shirt I wore yesterday to teach class. It's my $2 shirt that I got on Prince Edward Island, home of Anne of Green Gables, at a sale inside a barn. So I love my neighborhood. I've been in my house for 33 years. I live 3 blocks from Riverside Community Hospital, where I was born. People in my neighborhood, I've known them since kindergarten. And that was also part of writing this book, was sort of to say, what does it mean if you live in a place like mine, where Americans have been encouraged forever to be mobile? And this is such a strange time, Heather, because right now you're stuck at home, whatever you've made home or whoever you've made home with. And for years, when I would write about home and I write about Southern California, people elsewhere would say to me, there's no way, everyone in Southern California just got there from somewhere else. And I was very defensive about that. What I have learned during this quarantine and this pandemic is that my place truly is sometimes invisible. Riverside County has the second highest number of cases in California. Our death toll is way higher than many, many other places, probably 150 people today. More than about 3,700 cases, and that's just what we know. But it made me remember that I was growing up in the shadow of Kaiser Steel, and we breathed in all that smog. And there's part of that in my book too, where we would come in and we would be panting like dogs. My 4 brothers and sisters and me, and my mom, who was born in Switzerland, she would say, drink some milk and lie on the floor. And we literally thought drinking cold milk like washed some of the smog out of our lungs. But I felt so scared and so sad in my neighborhood too, because a lot of people don't even have cell phones. Yeah, I have friends who don't even have a cell phone. Like, they just come by and I'm on the porch and they literally holler at the gate. I come out. That's how it works. People don't have computers. They didn't have. My next door neighbor has 4 kids, and her husband had one of the first diagnosed cases of coronavirus, and she's got 2 sons that are freshmen in high school, and a junior high kid and a kindergartner. So she had no Chromebooks. I started a fence library on my fence, which lasts about 120 feet. And so I already this morning put out a bunch of books, and everybody's been donating books. And I like that because a lot of kids come by and they're like, this is the first book I've ever owned. I'm so excited. And that has nothing to do even with coronavirus. That has to do with how it is in my neighborhood. But you're funny to ask about the porch, because my kids actually did. My daughters yelled at me. They said, who's been on the porch today? Did you take 6 feet? So my friend Adolf comes by, my friend Louis Lozano, Adolf Martinez, my neighbor Jose, my neighbor Mario. Everyone comes by and we all share food. We stay 6 feet apart. Mm-hmm. But it's funny to see everybody wearing bandanas, because they'll be like, we weren't supposed to be wearing bandanas anymore, you know? Like, I know, but we still had ours.
What has it been like to teach during this time?
I was so nervous. I was nervous to do this, as you know, especially because your hair looks so good. I just need to get out there. Seriously, Heather, with the hair.
It's like 80% of my whole deal.
Your hair looks so nice.
Writing 80% hair.
I think it's really hard for someone like me who loves to be in person with my students to teach via Zoom. And I was so nervous. And I have a great graduate class there. It's a graduate fiction workshop. And there are 10 of us on the screen. And I was really, really freaked out about it. But my students have been great. And I missed them so much that I couldn't even, pretend I hadn't missed them. Teaching via Zoom has been really different. I'm sitting and they're sitting. The raising your hand part is hard. That's not the part that's the most difficult, though. The part that's hardest for me is I've been also at UC Riverside for 33 years. And I love having my office hours at Coffee Bean. This isn't an ad for Coffee Bean. It's just we have Coffee Bean. So I don't sit in my office. Your office looks super fancy. But I sit at Coffee Bean, and there might be 2 graduate students and maybe an undergraduate, and the undergraduate really wants to be a writer and is so happy to be able to see real writers who are the graduate students. But I also always have the perfect book for someone. I have stacks and stacks of books now out on the fence library, but normally I have a student named Patrick Carroll, who I love right now, who's from the Bay Area, and I was able to give him this beautiful book called Grief by Andrew Holleran. And I have a student from Salinas, Marcos Vargas, and I was super excited to introduce him to Alex Espinosa's work. And here's Alex Espinosa, who is my colleague now. His book is behind me here, Cruising, and I always have the Our Lady, that's me and Alex's thing. But that's been the hardest, Heather, is not being able to see them. I have lots of Zoom office hours, but I can't physically hand a book to Gleda, my student who's from Uganda, and who I have a perfect book here for her, and I will have to mail it to her. That part's hard. And she's up in Vacaville. I love that all my students are everywhere, and I love that we get to talk about California still all the time. People who are writing about Almonte and Salinas and Colton and Fontana, people who are writing, I'm writing about Mecca right now. So that part's been difficult. I miss them. Also, I usually take my students for an end of year party at the Elks Lodge right down the block. And the drinks are pretty cheap. They're $3 and they're super strong. And all the Elks like to see my students, and my students like to see where I throw darts for Darts League, which I can't do right now. I miss Darts League too.
The Elks Lodge it features in the book as well, right? If I'm remembering correctly, the Elks Lodge is a...
No, not yet.
Oh, I thought that it was. It's been a little while since I read it. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. The Elks Lodge, we were going to do a big fundraiser actually last Saturday to raise money. I'm chair of the Scholarship Foundation for the high school kids. So I was talking to you about the Elks Lodge and the book. Yeah.
Oh, nice. So I wondered, I know a lot of your book kind of started as these stories that got passed down from the women in the family to you verbally. How did you go about the extra research that you did and kind of looking into these stories a little more deeply to write about them?
Wow. What's really strange is I filled out my census form this morning, and I texted my youngest daughter, did you fill your census out where you're living now? And this is my first time not having so many people in the house for the census. There's just me and the dog. It's the first time in my life that I've ever, because my mom would fill out the census and there were 5 kids, and then I was married. I've never been alone in a house like this, and it's very strange. That's the reason I bring it up, is because the census was a really great source, but it was also really weird. I spent 3 years looking up census documents to find people in my mother-in-law's family. And one of the heroines in the book as well, as you know, this is my mother-in-law's 3 sisters, and that's Mary and Rosie and Myrtle. One of the mysteries was who their fathers were, and Daisy Carter showed up in California with 4 daughters, and she never ever, as they say, she took the secret to her grave about who their fathers were, because these were violent men and she had fled them. But just trying to look up people in the South just after the Civil War was nearly impossible, because large plantations, especially in Mississippi, rarely listed people by name. Then on my father-in-law's side, another heroine was Fine. We always knew her as Grandma Fine. These are the stories that were told me, was Grandma Fine, Grandma Fine. So I spent 3 years looking for her. I signed up for Ancestry, like many people, but I could not find her. I found 7 different versions of her in census documents. Mm-hmm. She was Fanny, Finey, Vinny, Tinny, Viney. She had so many different names, but all this time, my Uncle John, who lives near you up in Sacramento, Uncle John said we knew her as Grandma Fine. Her name was just Fine because when she was orphaned and a white family took her after slavery, they said, you're fine to work. And they called her Fine. I found her in a census document, if you can believe it. I found her, she was 1 year old, and her name was Saphina, Saphina, Ely. And it was a moment, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I just walked around the house thinking, this little girl, she was 1 year old, and by the time she was 6, she was orphaned, and she never saw any of her 4 siblings or her mother and father's people again. And she was alone in the world. And that was the other part in the book, is figuring out how did she survive from age 6. So the other thing that I would suggest too to people who are doing memoir, I found 2 other things that were really helpful. Census is really rough because people wrote down things wrong, especially if you were a Black family. And you should see some of the dumb stuff people wrote in the census. But city directories were hugely helpful. So if you're on Ancestry and you look up a city directory, that's the best way I found a lot of people's addresses and figured out where they had actually moved to. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, our Aunt Jenny, who really rescued the family, she lived in the old Greenwood district that was targeted during the Tulsa riots. And something happened. Her brother-in-law was shot in the knee, and he left Tulsa after the Tulsa riots of 1921. He came to Los Angeles, and he lived in what's now Compton, and he ran a junk business. So I was able to find his address, and Aunt Jenny came to stay with him. So the city directory and the voter records, which are hilarious because people are like Republican and then they're Democrat and then Republican. and then the census records. So that's a good question.
Were there things that surprised you that sort of showed up as common threads in these the stories of these women? There's so much diversity, not just racial diversity, but diversity in terms of the different lives that all these women led. But were there things that you found that they had in common as you began working on this?
Yeah, my daughters always laugh because they say that they're like, you and Dad you remember the weirdest things, and we really, really do. And my brother-in-law, Derek, he's famous on the East Side in our huge community. Derek remembers everything. He remembers everyone's birthday. He can tell you exactly what they were doing in 1979. So if you really need something and you don't want to go to Ancestry, you go see Uncle Derek. And you have some tequila and also you have meat. So that's the reason I'm saying it, is that we just had my brother-in-law's birthday party at Christmas on the 27th, which was nice because that was the last time we were all really, really together. There were only 100 of us in the backyard. And our cousin Montreal decided he was going to fry ribs because Derek wanted something different, not just the usual ribs. He wanted fried ostrich, but we weren't going for that. So we had fried ribs, and we were sitting there, and I was sitting with my cousin Terry, who was a huge help for this book too, and cousin Trent, and we just start telling the stories again. And we never get tired of the stories about the pigs or the squirrels. So there were moments where my father-in-law and all his brothers would sit around and say, what was the worst meat? Because they were starving. Their dad had died, and their mom had been taken away to the hospital because she was starving. And they said, it was raccoon. No, it was possum. No, it was squirrel. My father-in-law always voted for squirrel. Well, my father grew up in terrible, terrible hard times during the Depression in the highest, coldest place in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, Fraser. And here I was, a small white girl, the only white person at the first party where everyone talked about the meat, and I was 15. And they looked at me and I said, my dad said the worst meat was grizzly bear. They just looked at me and they said, who is this white girl that you have brought to our party? And that was that same first party, Memorial Day. And I said, my dad was starving and they were eating like sheep that had been dead for days. And they had to trap a grizzly bear that had been killing their sheep. And then my grandfather made him cut it down, and they had to cut it up and they had to eat the grizzly bear. And my dad was still bitter about how terrible that was. So all these men looked at me and they were like, she's all right. She can stay, because that's crazy. They're like, nobody eats a grizzly bear. What's wrong with you? So I found that meat was a huge deal in this book, is that our people on all sides, whether they were indigenous, white, immigrants from Switzerland, like my mom, Black, everybody was hungry. And they never took a single piece of meat for granted. And that meant a lot to me, to think about what we have. And so pigs, there were all these sorts of pigs. My grandmother tried to marry my mom off to a pig farmer when she was 15. And then we used to feed pigs in Rubidoux when my girls were little kids. They went and fed the pigs. that belonged to my father-in-law's best friend, Floyd. So pigs were a big deal. And then this is something that I've talked to my class about. In fact, if any of you listening are writers, something that I came up with that helped me so much in writing this memoir was that each book has a talisman, or maybe 2 or 3 talismans. And to say that I agree that this talisman is the pig. The pig figured in so many ways. The other talisman was the bullet. As you know, Heather, there were lots of guns in this book. Is that women and men were threatened all the time. When I was married, my husband left here. He left this room right here at 5 in the morning and went down the street, only 3 blocks, and directly across from the hospital where we were both born. He was getting gas to go to his job at Riverside Juvenile Hall, and it was 5 in the morning, and somebody got nervous because he was a tall black man getting gas, and they must have tripped the silent alarm, and he looked up, and there were police officers, holding guns, and his car was surrounded, and he had his hands out the window, and he was in law enforcement as well. So guns were the other talisman, and then the last talisman really was my porch and the driveway, and like what that meant for community. So I think if you're writing, whether it's a novel or a memoir, it's often helpful to think, what is this guiding talisman? Is it this necklace that somebody had? Is it books? Is it a song? Is it, quesadillas that your grandmother made? What's the talisman?
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I wanted to ask you, just because I know you have that wonderful stack of books behind you, what you've been reading lately, or what you're reading, what you're about to read soon.
I'm so happy that you asked me that question, because I'm admitting that last night I stayed up late writing about my mother-in-law because I missed her a lot. And I was cooking all these quesadillas for strangers. It's the easiest thing that I can cook and give to anyone who comes to the porch. But I love The Blossom and the Firefly by Cherie Smith. It's something I just showed to my class. It has these beautiful brief chapters, and it's a girl who's injured in the atomic bombing in Hiroshima, and also a man who's a kamikaze pilot. Mothers Before just came out from Eden Lepucki as the editor, and actually Alberta I put her in there for Mothers Before. It's all these beautiful vignettes. We had 1 page to write about a picture of our mothers, and I chose my mother-in-law before they were mothers, like these moments when they were laughing and they were free. Not that being a mother makes you never laugh, but you know what I'm saying. I'm loving Bonnie Jo Campbell's American Salvage, which I'm reading again. I got out Alex Espinosa, my beloved colleague's book, Cruising, because I was thinking about his mom, because I had just modeled the character after her in my new book. And I love how this is also a memoir of Southern California. And then I've never read Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, because I never had a room of my own. And I thought, well, this is a good time. But in between here, I'm not embarrassed to say, I stayed up all night reading The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. I started it, and I just thought, I can't put this down. It was such a great book. Do you remember Claudia and her brother run away to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City? And all 3 of my daughters at one time have worked in museums. That's a big deal in the book, is that our dream place is the Huntington Library in San Marino. It is literally like the place we go for solace. And so I wanted to read about this little girl who ran away to a museum, because my middle daughter, Delphine, told me she was also reading that, and she works in museums. So we had a good time. That's my stack. Yep.
Great. We're going to take some questions in a little bit. For Susan, I'm going to have her read first, but if you're watching on Crowdcast and you want to drop a question into the chat box, Beth will be popping back on in a little bit to ask those. But Susan has something that she'd like to read for us from her memoir, In the Country of Women.
Yeah, I sort of mentioned to you this moment about meeting my mother-in-law for the first time, and I thought I'd read you something, just a really brief little little piece. The driveway at 4289 Michael Street was the heartbeat of life for hundreds of Southern Californians who made their way into the family of General and Alberta Sims. The first time I walked across that sidewalk with their son Dwayne, I had no idea that this 30-foot stretch of concrete, lined with car engines, a barber chair, folding tables, and ice chests, was the apotheosis of the American dream, a corridor of American history, proof of loyalty and love that would not be denied. I was full of apprehension, wearing a halter dress that I'd bought with money saved from mowing lawns, cleaning houses, and babysitting. It was Memorial Day 1976, the year of America's bicentennial, and I had bought that halter dress at the Colton auction, which was a swap meet held out in the dirt yards and fields of Colton. Instead of casually stopping by one evening to meet Dwayne's parents and maybe his brothers and sisters, I had no idea what Memorial Day entailed. I didn't know until we pulled up into the driveway that that holiday meant about 100 people. I had taken off my glasses, so everyone was a little blurry until I got within 10 feet, but I knew what they saw. A way too short, way too thin white girl with my best attempt at Farrah Fawcett wings of hair. Okay, I have to stop. Heather, you know I confessed to you that I blow dried my hair this morning because I was intimidated by your hair. And I used the old blow dryer that my then boyfriend and I used to use together. He would blow out his giant natural, and then I would blow out my hair. We still have that blow dryer. It's a testament to American engineering. I had borrowed platform shoes from a friend, shoes that were so old that all the tiny nails around the edges of the leather, which kept the insoles and the wood together, kept coming out under my heels. Dwayne had seen me at school between classes, crouched over, trying to hammer the little black nail heads with the cap of my Bonnie Bell lip gloss. He had knocked the nails back in with a pocket knife. You can have a knife at school back then. Just don't even start. He took my arm now and began to say my name to the assembled. And then my mother-in-law, my future mother-in-law, Alberta, opened the screen door and said, "Come inside and get you a plate." And she held out her hand. I hope that's okay. And I have one other tiny little thing that I want to do. And this is from my Riversiders. Actually, this is funny. The card is from Bookshop. I'm so proud of Catapult Books and Andy Hunter partnering for Bookshop. So it's 96 degrees today. And so I'm thinking of all my beloved people here in Riverside and all my friends and family and all my neighbors trying to keep inside with their kids. And so I remembered when I had no air conditioning, and I thought I would read this little tiny part because that's how hot it is today. This is after my three daughters are born, and we have no air conditioning. When it was so hot in the summer that the fig beetles died flying in the air, falling onto the grass beside me and my three daughters, shining iridescent green as tiny Christmas ornaments. My girls held that beauty in their small palms. It was so hot, butterflies landed on our arms for sweat. Yellow finches flew with their beaks open, panting, and golden baby lizards slipped under the screen door to sleep in the shoes deep inside our closets. It was too hot to sleep. I put 2 sheets outside on the ground around 11 p.m. because we had no air conditioning, and those darn fig beetles were crashing into the window screens like drunken bombers, keeping my girls awake. We would lay in the yard, staring at the sky, the impossible night blue. We talked about the night blue, all the different blues. Winter sky faded pale, summer electric turquoise, ocean blue as new denim. So then, of course, we talked about Nîmes, France, where the material for Levi's was first made. And we talked about the lakes in Switzerland, where their grandmother was born, as vivid as Windex. And finally, when they fell asleep, I would lie there waiting for that moment when the earth changed each night and the dew rose to release the coolness and the moisture that rose up around us.
So lovely. Thank you. Where can people find you if they would like to find out information about what you're up to? And
well, my ridiculous Instagram that my children make fun of is about Riverside. And last week, I was briefly famous for posting a picture by the Santa Ana River of Booty Rock, which is a very large rock that looks like a booty, and it's a thing. And so there's that, but also it's super easy to email me at susan.straight@ucr.edu. Our emails are all the same at UC Riverside. And my website is actually built by someone who went to UCR, who graduated. He's from Orange County, so I have a website too, although I'm not very good about that. But yeah, I don't have Facebook.
What is your Instagram? It's Susan.straight.
I think it's just my name. Delphine made it for me. I think it's at Susan.straight. I'm very clueless. They told me I had to pick one, but I was never allowed to have Facebook because as my oldest daughter pointed out when she was in college, Facebook is for college students who want to hook up with each other, and you, Mom, are not a college student and you do not want to hook up. So I never have had it. It's being said. That was accurate.
Thank you so much. I just want to it's so wonderful to have you in my home and all of our homes while we do this. It's such a hard time to be far away from people, but I think that this is one of the joys that's come out of this difficult time, is this online, connections that people are forming. So it's just really been a pleasure. We're going to have Beth come back on, I think, and she will have some questions for you from the audience. Beth,
that was great, guys. Thanks so much. Susan, I have a ton of questions for you. You're wildly popular. First of all, let's give some shout outs.
But you can't have any questions about my sad hair or my clothing, okay? Don't. It'll just make me sad.
All about how gorgeous you both are. And no one can see me because I know my video quality. I'm working on it. Okay, so, but I'm gorgeous too. Okay. So let's give some shout outs to UCLA and UC Riverside, both of whom are watching. So, hey, kids who are, I guess, on Facebook. David Kippen, who is a beloved member of Alta, asked, he's watching right now with his UCLA journalism class.
Oh, that's great. I love his UCLA journalism class. Journalism was my major. And really, like, Heather's questions were so good about how do you do research? I always love the research part. So,
okay, well, there are two questions here. One is, yes, guys, this will be archived. You can rewatch it as soon as it's over. It'll be up on our website. It'll be here on Crowdcast, and it'll be on YouTube. We will get it to you in all sorts of exciting ways. Susan, what are your pointers for aspiring journalism?
Journalism. Well, so I love the fact that I went to USC. Don't be hating on me. I got a full ride because I got good SAT scores and my dad had a laundromat. So that's what happened. But I studied at USC journalism because my mom wanted me to be a sports writer so that she could meet Vin Scully. That was the entire sole purpose that I went to USC, majored in journalism, so that my mother could meet Vin Scully. I met Vin Scully. The thing about journalism is I think it's hard for us to be good listeners sometimes. I know I'm talking a lot now because it's my job here, but what I love is that I'm a really good listener. And so people tell me their life stories. And this is something I had lunch with Will Hurst and Blaise Zarega, and I love that they listened to me. It doesn't matter, journalism students, where you are. It's easy to be a good listener by just saying, well, what did you do then? Or like, wow, what color was her shirt? Or like the smallest question. To me, a stranger will start talking to me if I'm on the Amtrak train. And they'll say, what are you doing on Amtrak? And I'll say, well, I went to visit my daughter. And they'll ask me a question about my daughter. But instead of me talking, I'll say, oh, so you got on the train in Santa Barbara. Like, where are you headed? And they'll be like, well, I used to be a surfer. And then I get the whole story about surfing. But you have to ask the right questions and be quiet. So I'll be like, well, how old was your surfboard back then? And then you get to know how the surfboards are made. It's really listening, but also pausing and then asking them the question so that you know that, so they know how interested you are. I love hearing everybody's stories. That's why they tell them to me. And then in terms of writing it down, here's what's funny. Don't use your phone, man, because somebody's going to steal your phone and then there goes your story. No, like, these are from my former student, Lang Lo, whose grandmother survived the killing fields of Cambodia, and I have been writing about her. She now works for Citibank, and she gives me these, which is really funny. These are the best, and I know journalism students are laughing, but take notes, man, after the conversation. Don't be writing the sex scene while they're telling you the sex scene. No, wait till they're done. Okay.
We've moved into PG-13 rated territory. All right. We've got two questions from Alta publisher Will Hurst. Susan, he thinks that you visited every city in California. What has made you such a road warrior?
Because that's how we roll in SoCal. You learn to drive when you're like 12, and then
you guys drive everywhere.
We drive, man, and you know what? There's two things about that. Well, one thing is a little sad. Right when the pandemic first started, and it was fascinating to watch how everybody's like lack of driving was tracked. Like, people were said to be being really good in every county except for Riverside. And that's because people live out here, but they work 2 hours away at like an Amazon warehouse in Torrance. So part of the reason that we've been hit so hard is that everybody I know is still working. My neighbor Jose works for the Cisco warehouse, and my neighbors work sheet metal for heating and air conditioning systems. And a lot of my neighbors are nurses, and they work at Kaiser in Fontana or Kaiser in San Bernardino. So we learned to drive super young, and we love our classic cars. You know what? It's sad because this weekend should be like show and go. And then my other favorite car show is in Ontario. It's called Run What You Brung. And then you have to race. But I drive because of my beloved stepfather, who was born in Canada. He took us on all those driving trips. He took us to Anza Borrego, and we had scorpions in our sleeping bags. And he took us to Yellowstone and took us to Yosemite, took us to Death Valley. And I inherited the traveling bone, as the Allman Brothers call it. You know, you get the traveling bone, and we just love to drive. So my ex-husband and I will get in the car, my car, and we will drive all the way up to see our daughter in Oakland. And for the whole 6 hours, there will be no radio on even, because he'll be like, remember that one game we played in Salinas and I scored like 18 and I could have scored 20, but then coach put me on the bench? And I'll be like, yes, I remember. What happened again? And then he'll tell me the whole story. And so I love to drive. My favorites are finding tiny little cities. Like I'm obsessed with Coachella right now. Thermal, Oasis, and there's this great place called Valerie Jean, and it was named after the Valerie Jean Date Company, which no longer exists, but it's still called Valerie Jean. And people used to come by in the 50s and name their daughters Valerie Jean because they loved that date place. There's one story.
Well, kind of to that point, why Will also asks, you're, a successful author. Why have you decided to stay in Riverside of all places? Your home.
That's what everybody always used to ask me. And I had some bitterness about it, which I wrote about a little bit in the book. People would say you can never be a real writer if you come from Riverside. And you know who it was Eudora Welty from Jackson, Mississippi, and Flannery O'Connor, and also Ernest J. Gaines, who, by the way, left his beloved Louisiana because it was a terrible place. And he was lucky enough to go to Vallejo, California, and he lived in San Francisco, but he always wrote about home. And James Baldwin was the other reason. Well, it's because James Baldwin said, you must write about home. It's imperative that you write about this place. And he always knew. He was my teacher when I was 23, and he loved Dwayne. Probably loved Dwayne, my ex-husband, more than he loved me. But I'm also writing about him right now, about what it means to Zoom with students and talk about James Baldwin telling me, you must write about this place. And James Baldwin said, you must write about your home. And it feels to me like you will never leave there. And he went off to St. Paul de Vence, and I have a little handwritten piece of paper that he wrote his address on, and he said, you and Dwayne must come and see me. And we came straight home in our stupid car that broke down in Indiana and every other place. And we've never left. And I cried when James Baldwin died because I wished I had gone to see him. But I felt like he said the word imperative. And I loved that. I love these beautiful multisyllabic words. I didn't see how I could write about home without living here. And then I never wanted to leave. I can't leave behind my river and my friends. I got my poor kids, when they come, they're like, don't go to Target with mom and don't go anywhere with dad, because you'll see somebody and it'll be 2 hours. And so they're like, no, make them go. So Dwayne and I will go to like Target or Stater Brothers, and we'll come back 3 hours later with the thing, and they'll be like, yo, man, we ran into Montreal, and then we ran into like this other dude, and they'll be like, I can't leave that behind, Will. Sorry.
We've gone over, but miraculously our audience is growing. So to let everyone get on today, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we will wrap it up. But it's a doozy of a question.
Sorry, my answers are so long.
No, these are great. This is wonderful and lovely, and it's just a delight to have you. And it's so much fun to hear you and see you and get to know you in this way. All right, so Susan, what are your favorite books about California?
Oh. Wow, that's such a good question. I haven't even talked about my other obsession. I have my dad's, my real father and my stepfather were both really into maps. I have Thomas guides from my dad. My parents both just went into assisted living, so I've been cooking and taking stuff for them and been looking at my dad's Thomas guides. And there are so many books, I don't even know if I could name them, but my obsession is mapping out the state of California and all of my beloved books. So I can't even tell you my favorites. I'm just going to tell you a couple. I love The Peacock Poems by Shirley Ann Williams, which is a book of poetry, and she grew up near Fresno. And I love Ella Lefland, who is a writer that lived near Martinez and Vallejo. I love Al Young, who wrote about his beloved San Francisco, who is Angelina. I love that book. I love Tim Z. Hernandez, Breathing in Dust, which is a story set in the Central Valley. But I also love the old school writers. I'm right now, MFK Fisher, I just moved her over to the other side, but MFK Fisher, you know, writing about her childhood growing up in Whittier. Also, my other favorite writer, which I have to crack up, is Ross McDonald. Ross McDonald wrote such great mystery novels, and they were all set in LA. Everyone talks about Dashiell Hammett, who I love, Raymond Chandler, but Walter Mosley and Michael Connelly and T. Jefferson Parker and Ross McDonald, those writers, boy. And then I'm going to end with two last LA writers. Carolyn C. wrote about California like no one else. And her memoir is called Dreaming. And I just took a picture of it next to my Cecile Brunner rose. She writes about her mom slapping her next to the Cecile Brunner rose in the driveway and saying, "Get that look off your face." And she writes about what it meant to be a smart young girl and have that look on our faces, which apparently was the look of, I'm smart and I know something. And my other was Wanda Coleman. And I can't recommend Wanda Coleman highly enough. Her poetry about Los Angeles, it was really transformative to me. She was a Black woman writing about Los Angeles in a way that is sort of a direct antecedent to my love for the way Walter Mosley wrote about LA. And all those women in my book, like Aunt Jenny and Fine and Alberta and Daisy and all the aunts, whenever I used to go to LA, and I used to be so proud to know people that were from Compton, Watts, Crenshaw, Inglewood, all the places in LA, that's the LA I still love to read about. Is I'll never forget going there and seeing what it was like to see the beautiful houses of Inglewood and Crenshaw. So it's by no means a comprehensive list, but just a little bit.
Well, we're getting asked, and I just want to reassure everyone, I will watch this again, take copious notes, and I'm going to update this list on our website, so you'll be able to go and find these books, hopefully buy them.
I'll tell you what I'd like to do. Because I've been working on this anyway, why don't I make a beautiful comprehensive list? Because there's Michael Jaime Becerra's El Monte, there's Keenan Norris's Highland, and also there's my colleague Alex Espinosa's wonderful book set in Agua Mansa. And the funny thing is, I am friends with the Trujillo family, and they arrived in Agua Mansa in 1842. And so then to see Alex write his book Stillwater Saints about present day Colton, but it is named Agua Mansa, I can't come up with a better story than that. I still see Darlene Trujillo. Her people came here in 1842. And, you know, I think that's amazing. We often talk about the women in her family too. I'll make that list for you. I think that would be fun.
You are the best. All right, we are going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you, Heather. Again, buy the book. Right underneath, there are some other questions that we didn't get to. I'm going to try and get these to Susan and see if we can get.
Okay, I'll do it. And yeah, thanks to Andy Hunter. Working with Catapult's been amazing, and Andy Hunter with Bookshop, that's been really something. Bookshop is just, it's an amazing way to support independent bookstores, and I'm so proud to know Andy Hunter and everybody at Catapult. They've been wonderful to work with on this book. In fact, you know what I love? They even put little gold. See all the little shiny golds? That's the flower petals that Delphine threw up into the air from the wedding. We were standing in Riverside on Michigan Avenue when she did that. So thanks to Andy Hunter for doing Bookshop too.
This was great. Thanks, guys. All right.
Super fun. Thank you.
Tune in next week. Luis J. Rodriguez will be our guest with Heather. So follow.
He's on my list. He's amazing.
Thanks. Thank you so much, everyone. Wonderful.